My father didn't know that at 30 years old, sitting across from him at that dining room table, I was already making $17 million a year. To him, I was still the disappointment. The daughter who never figured life out. The dining room smelled like overcooked steak and old wood polish, the same way it had my entire childhood. The overhead light was too bright, unforgiving, casting sharp shadows under my father's eyes as he leaned forward in his chair. His face was red. Not embarrassed red, angry red. The kind that starts in the neck and climbs upward, pulsing. A vein stood out near his temple as his fist slammed down on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "If you're so determined to live like those losers you admire," he said, each word sharpened, "then go live in the streets with them." The sound echoed. My glass of water trembled. I didn't, and I looked at my mother instead. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the grain of the table like it might offer her an escape route. She didn't defend me. She didn't interrupt him. Her silence landed heavier than his words. That was the second wound. My father leaned back, arms crossed now, like a judge delivering a verdict he'd already decided on years ago. "You're 30, he continued. "And look at you." He started counting on his fingers. "No house, one finger. No husband, another. And no real job." The phrase real job hung in the air like smoke. I thought about the nights I'd slept 4 hours, the product launches that nearly broke me, the investors who had once dismissed me with polite smiles. I thought about the spreadsheets, the metrics, the decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But to him, none of it counted. "You think passion pays the bills?" he snapped. "You think freedom is something you just deserve?" His fist hit the table again. "I gave you every advantage," he said. "And you threw it away." I felt myself shrinking, not because I believed him, but because this version of him was familiar. This was the man who only understood success if it followed his blueprint. Anything outside it was failure. And still my mother said nothing. I didn't tell him that my company's error was $17,024,000. I didn't tell him that in exactly 2 weeks, my face would be on stage screens at a public announcement he'd probably brag about to his friends without mentioning my name. I didn't tell him because in that moment, something quiet shifted inside me. I realized I didn't need his approval. I'd come to that dinner hoping, embarrassingly, that maybe this time he'd ask questions. That he'd be curious. That he'd try to understand. Instead, he gave me an ultimatum. And ultimatums only work when the other person needs you. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back without a sound. The overnight bag by the door wasn't an accident. I'd packed it earlier that afternoon, folding my clothes with calm precision, just in case this went exactly how I feared it would, which it did. And my father stared at me, confused now, like he hadn't expected movement, only obedience. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked. I picked up the bag. "Somewhere I don't have to prove my worth," I said. "Quick question. What time is it where you're watching this right now? And where in the world are you watching from?" Because this revenge-filled family story started in one quiet house. And it's about to travel a long way. The Washington night air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, cool and clean, like I'd surfaced from underwater. Behind me, the porch light clicked off before I reached the sidewalk. That was my father's final punctuation mark. I stood there for a second, overnight bag heavy in my hand, feeling strangely weightless everywhere else. Anger buzzed under my skin. Humiliation lingered in my chest. And beneath it all, the familiar ache of wanting to be seen by people who never really looked as I walked away. It felt like a chain snapping. Quietly. But for good. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached the end of the block. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Naomi's voice came through warm and steady, like it always did. The kind of voice that doesn't rush you even when everything else feels like it's collapsing. "I'm guessing dinner went exactly how you thought it would," she said gently. "Because if it did, I need you to hear this part." I stopped walking and leaned against a parked car, the night quiet around me. "You do not have to convince him you're worth something," she continued. "You never did." I closed my eyes. Naomi had been there from the beginning. She was the one who watched me build the company from a borrowed desk, who heard me cry after investor calls where they smiled politely and said I was interesting but not ready. She'd seen me get mocked for choosing a weird tech life, while everyone else chased promotions with titles they could explain at Thanksgiving. You built leverage while they underestimated you, she said. That's not an accident. That's a skill. She paused, then added, quieter but firmer. And you're 2 weeks out. 2 weeks. That matters. I exhaled slowly. Let them think you're nothing, Naomi said, until the ink is dry. That sentence settled into my chest and stayed there. I replayed the voicemail as I started walking again, thinking about all the ways I'd learned to shrink myself over the years. How often I'd edited my own truth before anyone else could. When relatives asked what I did, I said I consulted remotely instead of saying I ran a SaaS company with clients in 12 countries. When old friends asked how things were going, I said, we're doing okay, instead of, we just passed 8 figures. I told myself it was humility, that I didn't want to brag, that success was something you carried quietly like good manners. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I didn't want to make people uncomfortable. I didn't want to be the strange one at the table, talking about product market fit while everyone else talked about overtime shifts and mortgage rates. I didn't want to see the looks, the ones that said must be nice or must not be real, so I code switched. I learned how to sound smaller, safer, easier to digest. Tech money in a blue-collar room felt like speaking the wrong language. And somewhere along the way, minimizing my success started to feel like politeness, even when it was costing me respect. Naomi had called it out years ago. You're not lying, she'd said once. You're just editing yourself for an audience that isn't listening anyway. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. Have you ever needed a friend to remind you that your value doesn't shrink just because someone you love refuses to see it? I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of that question. Not just for me, but for anyone watching this unfold right now. Anyone who'd ever needed external proof to counter internal doubt. Naomi sent another message, longer this time. Here's the plan, she wrote. And it's simple. No more explaining yourself. No more interviews for approval. You don't beg for respect. 2 weeks. Same timeline. Horizon Dynamics signs the enterprise contract. The ARR goes public. The valuation doubles. Let the numbers speak. Let it be so undeniable it embarrasses them. I stopped under a streetlight, rereading it twice. This wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it. No speeches, no confrontations, no dramatic reveals at the dinner table. This was about restraint, about delayed gratification, about letting reality arrive on its own schedule. I typed back one word, okay, as I started walking again. Something inside me felt steadier than it had all evening. The humiliation was still there. The anger too. But now they had a direction point. 2 weeks, no announcements. No explanations. No shrinking. Just execution. And for the first time since leaving that house, I wasn't replaying my father's words anymore. I was counting down. He told my mother I was technically homeless now. That was the word he used. Technically. Like it was a legal classification, not his daughter's life. I found out later, through a clipped text from my mom asking if I was safe, and whether I was sleeping somewhere appropriate. Meanwhile, I was standing in the kitchen of my high-rise apartment in Seattle, barefoot on warm concrete floors, watching the city lights flicker 25 stories below me. I had a roof. Had equity. I had a company that paid for both. But his declaration did something unexpected. It gave me a permission slip. If I was already cast as the failure, I didn't have to keep negotiating for peace anymore. The words replayed in my head alongside older ones. The way he'd said my sister Jenna's name with pride. Jenna bought a house. Jenna's husband got promoted. And my mother's quieter concern, always wrapped in worry instead of judgment. I just don't understand that computer thing, she'd said once. It doesn't feel real. 2 wounds, delivered differently, landing in the same place. That night, just after midnight, I sat on the living room floor with my back against the glass and hit record on my phone. Day 0, I said softly, the city reflected in the windows behind me. This is for future me. I felt a familiar pinch of guilt looking around the apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, space I knew would make people uncomfortable if they saw it. I'd worked hard for it, and still, part of me felt like I had to apologize to an invisible audience. Here's what's actually true, I continued. We have 312 remote teams operating globally. 12 countries. 4 time zones I can name without checking a map. I talked about Horizon Dynamics, the announcement coming up, the contracts that were already signed but not yet public. The momentum that felt inevitable now. Then my voice shifted. I'm not even sure I want him to be proud anymore, I admitted. I think I just want to stop caring whether he ever is. I flipped the camera and started listing everything they didn't know. First client at 23, working nights because my day job barely covered rent. Left corporate at 26 without a safety net. Missed Jenna's graduation because I was in Singapore closing a client who kept us alive another year. I swallowed. I paid Mom's medical bills anonymously, I said. Dad thought the hospital was just being kind. That one still stung. I stopped recording and let the phone rest face down on the floor. The room quiet except for distant traffic. The list wasn't for them. It was proof for me. Have you ever listed out your own life like that and realized you've been writing a completely different story in your head than the one your family sees? Like there are 2 versions of you walking around, and only one of them gets acknowledged. My phone rang the next afternoon. It was my father. Come to your senses yet? He asked, skipping hello. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then put it back. I'm not funding your little rebellion, he continued. This fairy dust job of yours. If you want to play entrepreneur, you can start paying your own bills. Then he delivered the threat like it was a mic drop. I'm canceling the phone line. $40 a month. You can figure it out. $40. That same morning, I'd approved a $90,000 vendor invoice without blinking. But it wasn't about the money. It was about erasing responsibility. About drawing a line so clean that if I failed now, it would be entirely my fault and no excuses. No invisible support. When the call ended, I opened my notes and typed one last line under day 0. This was the last excuse I had to stay small. Would you still dare to start something big if you knew every safety net behind you was about to be cut? Because by then, I already had. And there was no turning back. WY Monday morning, the week had a pulse. 9:07 a.m. My calendar lit up with a confirmation from Ethan, my assistant, short and precise the way he always was when something big locked. In press release is approved. Embargo lifts Wednesday at 8 a.m. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, feeling that familiar mix of calm and vertigo. The thing you've been building quietly for years is about to make noise whether you're ready or not. Tuesday, the headline dropped exactly on schedule. Horizon Dynamics standardizes global remote operations on Skyline Sync. It spread faster than I expected. LinkedIn first, then industry Slack channels, then emails from people who suddenly remembered my name. By noon, Ethan leaned into the glass-walled conference room, the Seattle skyline sharp and unreal behind him. You're about to jump tears, Mads, he said, half smiling. There's no unseeing this once it's out. By Wednesday, Logan was texting me photos from the airport. He was flying in from San Francisco to host the live Q&A segment. His usual joke trailing behind the logistics. Wild how fast overnight success happens after 12 years. The office didn't look like the place my father imagined when he said, computer thing. The conference room walls were glass, sunlight bouncing off steel and water outside. The rent alone could have covered payroll for his company for months. Banners were being mounted. A live dashboard glowed on a massive screen, numbers refreshing in real time. Press rows filled with people adjusting microphones, checking notes, pretending this was just another Wednesday. The same time, 3 states away, my aunt forwarded a LinkedIn link. My father saw my headshot first. Clean background, neutral smile. And under it, the words he didn't believe, founder and CEO. His reaction wasn't pride. It was suspicion. Anyone can put CEO on the internet, he muttered, scrolling jaw tight. Doesn't mean anything. The denial was almost automatic, like a reflex built over years. Back in Seattle, I stood in the restroom adjusting my navy blazer, the fabric heavy in a grounding way. Simple jewelry, no flash. Power dressing without theatrics. Logan caught me just before we went live. 17 mil ARR, he said quietly, off the record. People are going to call this overnight success. I smiled thinly. 12 years collapsed into 2 words. The red light came on. By the time the local news picked it up, the framing had already shifted. Small-town girl builds software for global corporations, the anchor said, smiling at the camera in my parents' living room. The TV flickered, and the Skyline logo filled the screen. My father leaned forward. "Elaine," he said slowly. "Isn't that Madison?" My mother didn't answer. She was staring at the lower third, reading it again like it might change. I told the story I'd told 100 times before, but this time it landed differently. The cramped studio apartment. The first lines of code written on borrowed furniture. Coordinating teams across 23 time zones so someone could work a meaningful job without leaving their home country. "This was always about access," I said. "Access to real opportunities, regardless of where you're born or who takes you seriously at first." Thanked the team. I thanked the families who supported them, even the ones who didn't understand what computer work really meant. Every word carried weight I didn't say out loud. Then the graphic flashed, projected annual revenue impact. $17,000,000 plus. For a second my father stopped breathing. The room in Seattle erupted in polite applause. In my parents' house, the silence was total. During the Q&A, Logan leaned in. "A lot of people watching from your hometown tonight," he said. "Where you came from clearly shaped you. I could have deflected. I could have kept it clean. Instead, I used it. Even in my own family," I said evenly, "there were times people thought this wasn't real work." A murmur rippled through the room. "But today we support over 80 employees directly," I continued, "and thousands of jobs indirectly across the globe." I paused. "That's real enough for me." My father's hand tightened around the remote, knuckles white. "Why didn't she tell us?" he asked, not really to anyone, and my mother said nothing, eyes still on the screen as the caption repeated. "Local founders startup hits multimillion-dollar milestone." My phone buzzed just as the event wrapped, unknown number. "We're outside." Naomi spotted them first on the crowd shot replay looping on a monitor near the exit. My father's truck, unmistakable. Parked crooked. Out of place. I hesitated at the glass doors, heart kicking hard. I could walk back into the office, let security handle it, let the night end cleanly. Instead, I walked toward the parking lot. He stood there in his worn work jacket. My mother clutched her handbag like a shield. Jenna was beside them in scrubs, arms folded, eyes sharp. They looked wildly out of place among suits and lanyards. 17 million, my father said without greeting. We saw the number. What is this? People slowed nearby, curiosity flickering. It's my company, I said simply. The same one I've been working on for years. Jenna shook her head. You never said it was like this. You made it sound like some hobby. I met her eyes. Every time I mentioned it, someone made a joke. My father's face darkened. We had to find out from television. You couldn't trust your own family. The irony landed hard enough to sting. Have you ever been accused of betraying people who had already thrown you away? Because standing there, with cameras packing up behind me and my past demanding explanations it had never earned, I realized this confrontation was only beginning. I noticed the reporters before my father finished his sentence. They weren't close enough to hear words, but they were close enough to see body language. Phones angled just slightly. A few heads turned. Curiosity sharpening the AIRAN that split second. I saw my options clearly. I could raise my voice and give them a spectacle. I could stay silent and let him control the narrative, or I could choose the third way. Come with me, I said, already turning toward the side lounge off the main floor. The space was wrapped in glass. No blinds, no privacy switch. Anyone paying attention could see silhouettes, movement, posture. I didn't pull anything closed, let them see. I don't need a tour of your fancy office, my father snapped as he followed, my mother and Jenna trailing behind. This isn't a tour, I said evenly. It's a conversation. A conversation about how my daughter's been hiding millions. He shot back. I stopped, turned to face him fully, and said the sentence that had been forming for years. I wasn't hiding. I was surviving. There's a difference. The words landed. I saw it in his face. Confusion first, then resistance. I opened my laptop and connected it to the wall screen. The dashboard came up instantly. Live user counts ticked upward in the corner. Server uptime maps glowed green across continents. A revenue line pulsed softly, updating in real time. $17 314 000. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jenna's eyes widened, scanning the screen like it might vanish if she blinked, and my father leaned forward, squinting, searching for the trick. The angle. The lie. Anyone can fake numbers on a TV, he said, grasping for ground. I clicked once. The Horizon Dynamics contract filled the screen. Corporate logos. Legal signatures. Routing numbers blurred but unmistakable. The language dense and precise in the way only real agreements ever are. He shook his head. That doesn't prove. I clicked again. My banking app appeared. Balances stacked cleanly, brutally clear silence. This, I said calmly, is my reality. This is what playing on the computer got me. I expected anger. What I saw instead was fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what this said about him. About the years he'd spent so confidently wrong. About how badly he'd misjudged his own child. Have you ever wanted to show someone every receipt for every time they underestimated you? Every late night? Every quiet win? Every moment they laughed while you built something real? Because this was that moment. My father's voice dropped, almost a whisper. Why didn't you tell us? I didn't answer right away. Every time I tried to share a small win, I said finally, you turned it into a lecture. About stability. About real jobs. About how I should be more like Jenna. Jenna flinched. You weren't interested in understanding my world, I continued. You just wanted me to abandon it. So I stopped trying to make you proud, I said steady now. And focused on building a life I could be proud of. Jenna crossed her arms tighter. You're richer than everyone we know. It wasn't admiration. Not quite. More like accusation. This isn't about being richer, I said. It's about you thinking you had the right to call me a failure without ever asking what my life actually looked like. My father straightened. We're your parents. We had a right to push you. You didn't demand better, I replied. You demanded familiar. There's a difference. Behind the glass I saw movement. Logan. A reporter pretending not to stare at my father followed my gaze and stiffened. Turn that off, he said sharply. This is family business. I didn't break eye contact. It stopped being just family business the moment you told me to go live on the streets, I said. You don't get to publicly humiliate me and then insist on privacy when the truth makes you look bad. My mother stepped forward then, voice trembling. Your father was scared, she said. People ask what you do. We didn't know how to answer. It made us feel like we failed you somehow. The room went quiet again and I nodded slowly. So instead of admitting you didn't understand, I said, you decided I must be the failure. No one interrupted. And when I refused to live small enough to make you comfortable, I finished. You threw me out. Outside the glass, the world kept moving. Cameras packed up. People whispered. The story was already spreading, but inside that room, for the first time in my life, the truth was louder than their fear, and there was no going back. What do you want from us? My father asked finally. His voice stripped down to something raw. Money. An apology. I shook my head. I don't want your money, I said. And an apology won't rewind that night. He looked confused, like he'd prepared for a different answer. What I want, I continued, is for you to understand that I am not coming back to being the daughter you controlled by withholding approval. I paused, letting the words settle. It turned out to be worth 8 figures a year, I added calmly. But that's not an invitation to climb on board now that it's safe. It's a boundary. His face tightened. You'd cut off your own family. The question sounded horrified, like I'd confessed to something unforgivable. If staying close means shrinking myself so you can feel big? I said quietly. Yes. From the main hall, muffled applause drifted through the glass walls. Someone else's celebration, someone else's milestone. My father stood there looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. My mother wiped at her eyes. Jenna stared at the floor, jaw clenched. So you don't need us anymore, my father said. I will always need a family, I replied. But I refuse to keep chasing one that uses love as a weapon. I took a breath. If you want a relationship with me, I said, it will be as the woman you saw on that screen. Not the girl you ordered to go live on the streets. The days that followed were loud. My inbox flooded with partnership requests. The website slowed to a crawl under traffic. Investors who'd passed years ago resurfaced with polite apologies and phrases like always believed in the vision. Back home, my parents became reluctant celebrities. People stopped my father in the hardware store. Neighbors made comments they thought were jokes. Funny how you said it was a waste of time, one of them laughed online. The clip from Logan's show spread fast. Imagine throwing out a kid who secretly makes millions. Parents like this don't deserve front row seats. The captions exaggerated, but the truth underneath held. The hospital. Jenna's co-workers shared the video. For the first time, she had to sit with her own complicity. She called me late one night. They keep playing it, she said. What does it even mean to you? The code, I mean. It was the first real question she'd ever asked. I told her the truth. That code had saved me. That it gave me language when I didn't have permission to speak. She apologized, not perfectly but honestly. It was late. About 10 years late. But it mattered. My mother left voicemails about misunderstandings. Never sorry. My father sent an email asking how to present the family, now that I was public. That told me everything, I replied once. Briefly. That I was open to a conversation that started with acknowledging what happened. That I wasn't interested in discussing image, money, or benefit. Weeks of silence answered me. The revenge wasn't loud. There was no dramatic cutoff, no sports car, no victory speech. It was quiet. That I stopped inviting them into decisions. I stopped shrinking my wins. I stopped confusing blood with entitlement. I put my energy where belief had shown up early. A year later, I stood on a different stage at a tech conference, telling a cleaner version of the story. No names. Just doubt, outgrowing expectations, and choosing yourself without bitterness afterward. A girl with shaking hands waited for me. My dad says I'm delusional, she whispered. That I'll end up with nothing. I smiled gently. You don't need $17 million to prove you deserve respect, I said. Money is just math. The real work is believing in yourself before anyone else does. That night, back in my apartment, city lights stretching below, I felt something settle. My father was still grappling with his version of reality. Maybe there'd be another conversation someday. Maybe not. But my worth wasn't on his table anymore. It was on mine. I'll leave you with this. If the people who were supposed to love you first became the ones who doubted you the most, what would you choose? Fighting for their approval? Or fighting for your own future? Tell me in the comments which path you'd take, and where in my story you thought I would have walked away. Finally, thank you so much for watching. Please leave your feedback in the comments and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story.